As you can see, the event will end at 5:30. Okay, and we'll have a moderator, Ms. Siu Im Cheng, as well as the panelist, Ms. Rama Shrida. Before we get started, there's housekeeping. Everyone will be on mute except for the presenters. Please key in your questions on the chat session, and it would help us if you could identify yourself when asking questions. All our webinars are recorded and they are available on YouTube for those who can't attend. The first speaker will be Malika Sathi, and she's the Women in Identity Australian Ambassador, and she's also the Vice President, Cyber and Intelligence Solutions and Digital Identity at MasterCard. She will now introduce Women in Identity Organization. Malika, please.
Thank you, Helen. I hope everybody can hear me. As Helen said, my name is Malika Sathi. I work for MasterCard based in Sydney, and I'm responsible for our digital identity business in this part of the world. I'm really privileged to be the ambassador for Women in Identity. A number of us have joined earlier this year, and very excited to be part of this wonderful organization. So for those of you that are attending a Women in Identity event for the first time, I thought I'd take a few minutes to just explain what Women in Identity is all about. So on that very first, thank you, Jocelyn. So we're a pretty new organization, a very young organization. The organization's only just over a year old. It was established by the founders in the UK about a year ago. So we celebrated our very first birthday in June 2020. It's a not-for-profit organization. It's run entirely by volunteers. So there's a number of us that are very passionate about the topic of identity, and we work in this area, and we really want to join the conversation. The other really important thing to point out is this group is not just for women. You know, like the name suggests, men are always welcome to join the conversation. And the membership is evidenced that of this wide kind of interest in the topic. So we have around and growing steadily 1,100 members already. We have on social media 4,500 followers, which is growing rapidly. And we have 15 ambassadors across 10 countries already, and that's also grown since we put this slide together. So that's just indicative of the strong interest that women and members have in being change champions and discussing the topic of diversity and inclusion in the area of identity. So Jocelyn, if you could move to the next slide. So what is this about, and why Women in Identity? So Women in Identity wants to be a catalyst for change. We want to help create and support a more diverse workforce in the identity industry. What we hope to do through these conversations is really inspire industry professionals to design solutions that are more inclusive and cater for a whole range of different use cases, and that appeal to and support and serve a very wide range of users as well. Next slide, please. And our goal is perfectly captured in our vision. Our vision is identity solutions intended for everyone, and it's built by everyone. So we want to make sure that there is a very wide group of people involved in developing solutions in digital identity. This is also embodied in our values and our commitment to drive change. We want to ensure that there is thoughtful debate about diversity and creating a diverse workforce in the world of identity. We want to make sure that there is no segment that's left behind, and we develop, as we develop innovative digital solutions. We also want to make sure that our solutions are developed ethically and responsibly, making sure that those of us in those populations that don't have a voice in these topics are represented, and their needs are taken into account. So next slide, please. So on the next slide, you'll see the website for Women in Identity. It's just, simply www.womeninidentity.org. Please join us, go and have a look at the content, become a member, join the movement. We're also very active on social media. So on the next slide, these are some of our handles on various social media platforms. So, please, contribute, join the conversation, be part of the discussion in the industry. And again, on the next slide, we've got a range of sponsors to thank. And, if you're interested in being a sponsor, please reach out to your Women in Identity ambassadors. These sponsors are the ones that make these events happen. They provide us the invaluable support and the resources required to run these webinars and our workshops and, these kind of conferences. So with that, I will hand you back to Helen. We have an absolutely amazing panel today. So do enjoy the webinar, and I look forward to catching up. Thank you.
Thank you, Malika. Our next speaker, our privileged speaker, is Minister Indrani Raja, who is the Minister in the Prime Minister's office. She's also the Second Minister for Finance and the Second Minister for National Development. And her topic is the empowerment of digital identity. Minister Indrani, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to acknowledge Ms. Helen Chua, WID Singapore Ambassador, Ms. Malika Safi, WID Australia Ambassador, distinguished guests. Good afternoon to everybody. First, let me say what a great pleasure it is to be able to join you at today's event and to thank you very much for inviting me. The launch of Women in Identity's Singapore chapter is timely and even more so given the ongoing COVID-19 situation. Let me first set some context. For some years now, there has been an unstoppable trend towards digitalization. The digital economy is big and it's growing. A 2018 study commissioned by Microsoft found that by 2021, digital transformation is set to add as much as US $10 billion to Singapore's GDP and increase the GDP growth rate by 0.6% annually. Even on a day-to-day basis, digitalization has been changing the way we live. This was already the trajectory before COVID-19, but COVID-19 has turbocharged the speed of digitalization. This has presented us with an opportunity to hit the reset button and consider new ways of living and working that encountered resistance before. We have now become accustomed to working from home as the new normal. But less than a year ago, the idea that people could successfully work away from the office and from home was still regarded with a lot of skepticism. Now, it's common to meet friends and family online, order our food via apps, and to shop online. So all of this leads to the importance of having a digital identity. To digitalize successfully, we need a digital identity that can be used widely and securely. A national digital identity helps to catalyze business innovations and brings convenience to citizens and businesses. In addition, given how common incidences of security breaches and data mismanagement are, countries must create safer and more secure systems for people to transact. Here in Singapore, we are striving to become a digital leader. We already have the basic building blocks in place. Our digital infrastructure is solid, and our citizens are generally technically mature or technologically mature. However, we do need to build on our foundations by developing a digital ecosystem. Singapore's National Digital Identity, or NDI for short, is a key part of that ecosystem. Singapore's NDI involves issuing residents and businesses a crypto-based digital identity which they can use for both government and private sector transactions. It's intended to help users save both time and money. For instance, SingPass does away with the need to remember multiple usernames and passwords for access to digital services. Services like SingPass and PayNow make it faster for citizens to check and receive their benefits from government schemes such as care and support payments and GST vouchers. Businesses can integrate parts of the NDI platform into their digital services, which reduces the need for them to develop their own costly systems. To give an example, MyInfo is a tell us once service that eliminates the need for a person to repeatedly provide and verify the same personal information when transacting online. Banks and financial institutions have used MyInfo APIs to grant instant approvals to bank account or credit card applications. In this COVID-19 public health crisis, having a digital identity has been beneficial. NDI has made checking in through Safe Entry, the National Digital Check-in System, more convenient. This was done by incorporating the Safe Entry check-in feature into the SingPass mobile app with all the required information pre-filled. We've been continuously working to improve the Safe Entry check-in experience to make it more convenient and seamless. In July, we rolled out the Safe Entry group check-in feature, which allows SingPass mobile users to do check-ins on behalf of their family members. Having an NDI is one thing, but the other key to success is digital inclusion. Globally and Singapore, inequality is a concern. We're determined to close that gap. In Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong's national broadcast in June 2020, he presented the government's enduring vision of Singapore as a fair and just society where everyone can chase their dreams. There are many facets to tackling inequality, and bridging the digital gap is one of them. The global lockdown and our own circuit breaker put a spotlight on this. We saw how seniors or the less educated or those from low-income households had a much harder time than those who were digitally equipped and digitally savvy. During the circuit breaker period, schools switched to full home-based learning. However, for many students from low-income families, home-based learning was not a straightforward shift. Some did not have internet-enabled devices at home or had to share devices with siblings. Others had devices but no Wi-Fi. MOE, that's our Ministry of Education, stepped up, with teachers helping to identify students in need and to offer support to the family. MOE and IMDA quickly modified and enhanced the support schemes for students to acquire digital devices by broadening the eligibility criteria and speeding up delivery. Schools loaned out devices to support students in home-based learning, while IMDA also subsidized a second computer for large families with 3 or more children. Private sector corporations like StarHub and community organizations like Engineering Good and SG Bono also stepped forward to lend their support, for example, by loaning out new devices, providing free wireless dongles, and refurbishing donated second-hand laptops. The government has put in place several initiatives to close the digital gap. First, access to devices. In June, the government announced that all secondary school students would get a personal laptop or tablet by 2021. MCI and IMDA also have long-running schemes such as Home Access and the new PC Plus, which subsidize broadband connectivity and a shared household device for lower-income families. But access to devices without more is not enough. Digital inclusion is also about having the skills and the literacies to benefit from digital connectivity. So the second step is to equip those who are often digitally excluded with these skills. So for example, our Seniors Go Digital program is being rolled out by the SG Digital Office and includes one-to-one or small group classes for seniors to improve digital literacy. The learning program for each senior will be tiered according to his or her digital needs. Seniors will be guided through 3 tiers of digital skills, starting from basic communication tools like WhatsApp and gradually progressing to using e-payment tools and internet banking apps. We've also set up digital community hubs in accessible locations like community centers or libraries. This enables us to reach deep into the community and provide supportive and encouraging environments with personalized advice and support. We also introduced other initiatives to help different segments of society cope during COVID-19. For many businesses, digital transition is now a matter of necessity. We have seen restaurants and hawkers rise to the challenge of dine-in restrictions by getting onto online platforms. Even if online delivery and takeaway orders cannot completely replace dine-in revenue, it's nevertheless still a much needed source of revenue at a time when the F&B industry has been severely affected. The Hawkers Go Digital initiative aims to get stallholders to adopt e-payment solutions and enable them to take online orders. The Digital Resilience Bonus is an initiative to help small and medium enterprises by uplifting the digital capabilities of a broad base of enterprises, starting with the food services and retail sectors. Ultimately, digital inclusion is a whole of society effort. While we try to make it as easy as possible for everyone to digitalize, all these initiatives will not amount to much if there's no drive for digitalization on the ground. If we are to succeed, the government's efforts must be complemented and strengthened with the strong support of public, private, and people sector partners. For example, the Code and Community Program offers free multi-level coding classes for underprivileged students. Earlier this year, Google contributed $1 million in grant funding, with IMDA matching its contribution. The increased funding will enable partners, Saturday Kids, and 21C Girls to bring the program to another 6,700 students aged 8 to 16 years by 2022. So allow me to conclude. Despite the pandemic, digitalization offers hope for the future. We must seize the opportunities afforded by digitalization. The government will support citizens and businesses and bring everyone on board so that technology becomes a source of growth and progress for all, rather than an accelerator of inequality or a wedge for division. Everyone should be part of this growth future, including women. Hence, I'm very pleased to be here for the launch of Women in Identity's Singapore chapter today. This will contribute greatly to ensuring that women are right up there in the vanguard of those with digital identity. Once again, let me congratulate Women in Identity's Singapore chapter on its launch today. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing your views during the panel discussion later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Indrani, for highlighting how much Singapore government and the private sector has actually helped to have an all-inclusive plan and execution for every person in Singapore. I'm the next speaker, and my topic is Digital Identity Contributes to the Safe Return of the New Normal. You ask yourself, is identity critical? You have a record with the government that you're a citizen of that country, and that's your identity. In the case of Singaporean, it's your IC number or your birth certificate. Can you imagine if your identity is removed from the NRIC registry? When that happens, you cease to exist. You no longer could get access to financial institutions, no government benefits, no healthcare services, no education. Now you begin to realize how critical a person needs to have an identity. Now in the digital space, that physical identity such as an ID card, a passport, a driver's license is translated into a digital identity. How then do we design an identity system that will embrace everyone within a society? How do we take into account the diversity inherent in every society? Diversity with inclusion is the key to designing an identity system, and even more so, a digital identity solution. We believe that diversity with inclusion is the key to success for the digitalization of a nation. As Minister has pointed out, that the Singapore government has done much to close the digital gap, to ensure digital inclusion. Programs like Senior Go Digital is a classic example. The new normal will continue into the future as people adapt to the change. During the circuit breaker, most of us work from home, kids have online classes, households have gone online grocery shopping, there was home delivery of food. Businesses have to adapt by moving online into the digital space, especially the F&B sector, in order to thrive. However, this is easier said than done if they have no means to technical literacy nor the financial means. Singapore government has taken effort to help with the Hawker Go Digital initiative, as well as provide the financial incentive to lift the digital capabilities. With all these online businesses comes the need for digital identity. Digital adoption has accelerated at an all-time high during this pandemic period, as you can see on the screen of the financial institutions example. But you wonder, how does the bank onboard you digitally unless you have a digital identity? How does e-payment take place unless both parties have got digital identities? In Singapore, businesses have got a digital identity, and that's their unique entity number, UEN. Every individual, foreigners that are working in Singapore have got a FIN, a foreign identification number. So every person in Singapore do have a digital identity created by the Singapore government. There are three elements in the adoption of digital identity, and that's safe, seamless, and secure. In the case of Singapore government, they've developed Trace Together and Safe Entry to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Behind these applications is actually the digital identity. You have to enter your NRIC number as your digital identity for contact tracing. Vigilant Gantry is another one that allows the digital means of ensuring temperatures of every individual is measured so as to prevent the spread. URA has also come up with a website to allow people to monitor the crowd level of parks, supermarkets, and this is again using the digital space. Digital means such as robots are also deployed to remind people of social distancing. Hence, you can see digitalization is so important, even more so during this pandemic time. The next area to look at is a seamless user experience. Every person has got a digital identity, and that's your NRIC number. But do you realize that when you go online, to buy food or online grocery shopping, you actually create another digital identity. People tend to create a digital identity in each and every website. And hence, it's very difficult to remember so many digital identities. Websites have tried to link the digital identity with Facebook or Google account, making it seamless and a smooth experience for the customers. The next area to consider is secure. If digital identity is simply created by anyone, it's not secure. If it's not backed by any ID, it can be stolen easily, and somebody else could be using your username and password to log on to access your account. But if you have many username and passwords, like if you have 3 bank accounts with 3 username and passwords and you have to change them regularly, this makes it very difficult for you to remember. The other area of consideration is fraudulence. If you start writing your username and password somewhere and a fraudster gets a hold of it, it's easy for them to get into your account. But how does the organization know that that's not you? Anybody can be you as long as they have your username and password. And so banks have added a one-time password and hard token. But in a nutshell, consumers need to be educated and trained to understand that actions in the digital world have direct impact in the physical world, as our digital identity is a representation of who we are physically. In fact, governments and enterprises have touted the use of biometrics to fulfill this need for a safe, seamless, and secure digital identity system. In creating digital identity, we need to consider what we have, what we know, and who we are. What you have and what you know can be forgotten and can be stolen. But who you are in the form of biometrics is actually your physical and behavioral characteristics. It identifies you as a unique individual, as the biometrics of every person is unique. Biometrics is the only digital form of identity which can prove you are who you are, and it's non-repudiated because it's a mathematical computation using the unique feature points which we call templates. The 4 most commonly used biometrics are face, fingerprint, iris, and voice. So, is biometrics the solution? Biometrics need to be backed by a secure ID, such as our NRIC, so that we can prove who we are in the physical world. It also offers us security as our digital ID. There has to be a golden source of truth to our identity, and in this case, the Singapore government has issued a national ID card. Gartner has predicted that by 2022, 40% of medium and large organizations will be using biometrics for information security. However, we need to be cautious that the use of biometrics need proper governance, security, and transparency so that there can be trust by the people who provide their biometrics. Now, there's considerations when using biometrics. You can see 2 faces wearing jackets. Are these 2 faces twins? No, they're not. One person is a real person and the other is actually wearing a Hollywood-grade 3D mask. Can you identify which is the real person and which is not? Can your biometrics technology identify the fake from the real? What about aging? Our passport can last for 5 years. If we register our face at year 1, after 5 years, can the biometrics technology still recognize your face? Or will it reject you at the border control? What about cosmetic surgery? You can enroll your face with a bank, but after your cosmetic surgery, are you still able to access your account? Will you get rejected? You need to consider this when deploying biometrics. Most biometrics technology have to use a sample to train their engine. If the sample sizes are made up of a certain skin type, then it's less likely to match with other skin types. There's also inherent problem with biometrics. There are people born without fingerprints. There are people who work in the chemical industry that the chemicals have actually worn off their fingerprints. What if they are born without a voice or even an iris pattern? So these are inherent problems in the biometrics world. On the bottom of the screen, this is a real example where you see a guy, he's actually applying a passport using his photo, and it got rejected. It said that his eyes are not open. Do you realize that the majority of the world population are made of Asians and our eyes look like this? So can your biometrics technology detect that his eyes are open and not closed? The other consideration is interoperability. Is your system adhere to ISO standards or is it isolated on your own? What about speed? Speed has to do with use cases. If you deploy biometrics for access control, you want it to match in a sub-seconds and not wait at the access control, not wait at the gantry for a minute when the technology is matching you. What about accuracy? For corrections and banks, this has to be absolutely accurate. It cannot be someone looking similar to you that's accessing your bank account. So the option that some governments like the Indonesian and Indian governments, they've chosen 3 biometrics, a multimodal model to address some of these issues. And they've used face, fingerprint, and iris. The other consideration is the technology mature? Has it been tried and tested globally? Or are you the only ones using a new biometrics technology? What about, is it revocable? You've only got one face. What if the biometrics is compromised? Can you change your face? What about ease of use? Biometrics is actually easy for a 3-year-old as well as an 80-year-old, as long as you know how to take a photograph. I must applaud the Singapore government for having created a unified national digital identity, leveraging on biometrics. And this will act as a catalyst for business innovations, as Minister Indriani has mentioned. With this unified platform, government agencies and commercial organizations do not need to create costly separate identity management systems. They can simply leverage on this platform to verify and to authenticate the people. Singaporeans do not really need different digital identities for different sites. However, for restaurants and for online shopping, would you like to use that digital identity? It's up to you. Foreigners working in Singapore have PIN as their digital identity, and they too have their biometrics registered. So NDI is the foundation that undergirds the Smart Nation initiative. So in short, digital identity is all about you. Trace Together and Safe Entry is created to protect you. Online Hawker Fare is created for your convenience. NDI is created for your security. So with NDI in place, you can feel secure that the system is using your biometrics to identify you and hence prevent fraud cases. Biometrics is the physical and behavioral characteristics of a person. It identifies you as a unique individual, as the biometrics of every person is unique. Digital identity using biometrics can prove you are who you are and can authenticate and verify you. I end by saying biometrics is who you are. Thank you. Our next section is on the panel discussion, and I'd like to invite moderator Ms. Siu Yim Cheng to introduce herself, and Ms. Rama Srida, the other panelists. Yim Cheng, please.
Hi, my name is Im Cheng. The organizers asked me to say a few words about myself. So let me start by saying that I have had a diverse and interesting career in tech. I have worked in R&D, worked with AI when it wasn't that fashionable then. I've also worked in the government sector, spent years in Microsoft selling to government and commercial enterprises, have been a CIO buying and deploying tech, did some software development in a startup that sells AI IoT software. And now I'm with ComfortDelGro as their Group Chief Digital Officer. Today is my honor to be the moderator of this distinguished panel to discuss digital identity. We have invited a group of very prominent women as our panelists. So firstly, we have Minister Indriani, Minister in the Prime Minister's Office, Second Minister for Finance and National Development. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Rama Shrita. She is Executive VP, Digital and Emerging Partnerships and New Payment Flows for MasterCard Asia Pacific. Rama is a leader in the world of payments, technology, and financial services. She has led teams and businesses across geographies and industries in Asia Pacific to drive transformational growth. And in her current role, Rama leads the efforts to innovate and establish new digital ecosystems and payment flows. Rama is also a passionate mentor with a special focus on helping women in technology and business unlock their potential. Last but definitely not least, we have Helen Chua, our WID Ambassador for Singapore chapter, and she's also Senior Sales Director for NEC Asia Pacific. So without much further ado, let's get started. You are strongly encouraged to please put your questions in the chat. We will pick it up from the Q&A tab. Okay, so do use that. Just to kickstart, we have heard a lot about digital identity. Minister's speech has referred to the importance of having a digital identity. So I would like to invite the panel to share a little bit more on this. What, in your opinion, would be a good or safe digital identity? Do we all really need to have a digital identity? And should there just be only one digital identity? Or maybe we should have different levels of identity for different purposes. So, panelists, would you like to share your thoughts, please? Maybe we start with Minister.
Well, could you just repeat that last line of the question, because I didn't quite get that bit.
Okay, so I asked about what would be a good or safe digital identity, and do we all, normal citizens, really need to have a digital identity? And if so, should it just be one such identity? Or do we have different levels of identity for different purposes?
Right. I think the key thing is that, well, you need a digital identity for sure, because as Helen has explained, the way the world is going, so much of transactions are done online. Even in the COVID-19 situation, you can see that the need to be able to tell whether people have entered a certain building, you can't, to try and do that manually, it would be crazy. Because if you go into one building, you have hundreds of people coming in a day. How do you keep track of everybody? And if there is a risk of infection or somebody has got COVID-19, how do you track them all down? And we had to grapple specifically with this question at the onset of COVID-19, because many of the commercial buildings in Singapore were still operating a manual system. And to be able to track down everybody quickly would have been a nightmare. So that was the background of the development for safe entry. And safe entry is premised on having a national identity. You must be able to tell who this person is and must be able to verify that this is indeed that person. So I think the answer to your question is yes, you need it. But secondly, if you're going to have it, then issues of privacy, of overreach, intrusion, trust, all of those issues come to the fore. So you do need to have a system that is trusted. You need system integrity, you need the technical integrity, and you also need the integrity of the people who are administering the system. I mean, we've had one or two cases of people using other people's passwords or identity in order to gain access to information that's in private sector. And I think there was one other case that was prosecuted. So you can see that there's potential for abuse, which means that you must have a rigorous system with enforcement procedures in place as well, and the laws which back them up. So I think that's sort of a very broad brush answer to your question. But if you need me to, clarify any parts of it, happy to do so.
Yes, we will delve deeper into that topic in a bit. Maybe Rama would like to share your opinion.
Sure. Thank you. And after the very compelling arguments that Ms. Indrani put across and what Helen spoke about as well, if I have to, without repeating myself, sum it up, I think there are three reasons why a digital identity is crucial. We speak in the context of Singapore and digitization, and I think that is clearly evident from everything that's been said, so I will not repeat that, right? Definitely realizing the potential of digital dividend for a nation is totally dependent on being able to create an identity for its citizens and enabling that identity to be used for digital transaction, operate digitally, introduce seamlessness, all of that. But I think I also want to touch upon a subject that's not been spoken about so far, which is if we believe that Singapore is a part of the larger ASEAN economy, and therefore we can touch and feel countries around us, there is a significant population in this region that is not digitally included, right? And therefore having an identity, enabling an identity for demographics that are not yet digital so that we can create inclusion for them is also important. Now, if you stretch a little further and think about 1 billion of our less fortunate brothers and sisters around the world, they don't even have an identity, right? And to me, that is very unfortunate. I think one of the biggest goals, in fact, the United Nations 2030 goals actually has a legal identity for everybody as a basic goal. Now, when we talk about digital identity, it actually assumes that there is an analog identity that exists. And 1 billion people do not even have an analog identity, right? Then there's the third aspect, right? So there was digitization and inclusion in digital world. The second was just inclusion per se, right? And the third thing to me is convenience. And I think, Helen, you spoke about this a lot. A world without passwords, a world without trying to remember all the various permutations, combinations across the 200 digital sites that you need to get to. And as we are aging, I don't know about you guys, but I definitely try various combinations and figure I'm locked out every time I try to do something online. Just growing old without that stress of operating in a digital environment has to be a good space to look forward to. So I do believe convenience is a very important factor. And if I have to sum it up, inclusion is not just from an economic perspective. Financial inclusion is very important. Citizen inclusion, every single citizen of a country needs to be able to be operating digitally without any inconveniences. That's important. The third thing is, of course, the benefits of digitization. And also one aspect that we don't really talk about again in Singapore, because this government is so ahead of everyone else that you kind of think through everything. But health inclusion, right? Benefits of public health administration is also a big problem to be solved. So I feel like, there are a bunch of arguments that make the need for digital identity so important. You asked actually 3 questions in one, Yim Cheng. I think you were, being really testing our memory here, right? So the second one that you asked was, is what constitutes a good digital identity? And I do not want to, make Helen angry, but biometrics is really important. But I am actually not sure that biometrics is the only thing that is primary in a digital identity. The way I think about digital identity is it is a collage of personal data. It's a collage of personal data that's up to date at any point, includes your most recent transactions, coming from a very high fidelity database. It's multi-purpose, it's reusable, and it's dynamic. Static data does not help a digital identity, right? So I think there's a ton of things that is there. So it's a composite of your date of birth, your passport details, biometrics, absolutely, very important. But all the other attributes, your driver's license, your educational certificates, there's a bunch of static and dynamic data that come together to create a digital identity. So
that's a great lead on. I would like to now hand the question over to Helen.
Yeah, I strongly believe that there has to be a digital identity, but as Rama rightly puts it, the analog identity is critical for every person before we even talk about digital identity, because digital is really much used in the digitalization in more developed countries, I would say. And you said what constitutes a good digital identity? Well, yeah, we believe in the collage of information, but what is easy for every person to get onto online transactions? What is easiest for, that's all inclusive, that's easy to be used, regardless of your race or age, economic background. I mean, what constitutes that sort of ease to use digital identity is useful. And I think your third question about, is there a need for multiple levels of digital identity? I've actually spoken on more the simple background on the NDI, but NDI certainly is trusted only in a simple basis. In the digital world, there's no boundary. We're going across geographies. So what is actually a good digital identity across all these boundaries? Can there be multiple? I believe so. I believe so. Until a point where the world collapses into one, which I don't think would ever happen. But if that happens, where there's a collaboration of government amongst all the identities, there could be just a single identity.
Thank you, panelists. There are some questions from the audience, and I would like to share some of them with you. There's a question around, are any of you involved in any projects or initiatives in this region that addresses the issues in digital identity and financial inclusions? Maybe Rama, you would like to comment on that?
So one of the examples is that I know is being developed right now is in Myanmar, actually, where I know that there is a telco that's working to create a digital identity, and that will hopefully then get integrated into the national repository, so to speak. So, and that is definitely coming from the perspective of financial inclusion. And we normally, when we talk about digital identity, like Singapore, most of the developed countries probably kind of get to it first. So you have live projects in Singapore, Canada, and Nordics. But equally, I do believe that there is Myanmar that's considering that, and then there are a couple of others that I'm struggling to remember, but I definitely can quote Myanmar right now.
So I would like to maybe ask a question based on what the Minister has just mentioned just now. We have used digital identity for our COVID-19 trace, what we call
Trace together.
Trace together.
Right? How do we assure people that we are not moving towards a big brother is watching you kind of situation as we extend the use of digital identities? we have seen that some people are actually not very comfortable with the trace together solution. And actually, technically, all movements can be tracked, right? And of course, there's this assurance of the greater good versus privacy. Is this a big concern?
If I could have a go at that, a lot depends on the country, the system, and the values, and how the information is actually used in practice, and what people see coming out of how it's used. So in the case of Trace Together, which is really Bluetooth technology, what it does is it just captures who you have been next to or in close proximity to for a certain period of time. And that information remains in your phone. The government will only access it if either you or the person that you've been next to for that prolonged period ends up testing positive for COVID-19. So in a sense that information remains with you, but we have the ability to access it only if the need arises. And it's partly system design, but partly also is how is it actually carried out? And if people see that it is carried out in accordance with the safeguards and the relevant protections that are in place, then there's trust in the system. So I can understand people's uneasiness. And that's another reason why we also stepped up with safe entry. Because even if you don't have Trace Together, at least when you have safe entry, we can still access that information. But at the end of the day, if anybody really thinks that in today's world, you can get about, at least in urban situations, without being tracked down by being invisible, I would have to say that that's not going to happen. I mean, even in London, for example, it has probably the most cameras, per meter, where you can trace cars, you can trace people's movements, and that's the reason why some of the investigations have been very quick. In China, you have facial recognition, you have other means. So, okay, if you're living out in a forest somewhere with no buildings nearby, maybe, but anywhere that is built up, I would say that in today's world there'll be some way of being able to track you.
Thank you, Minister. Can you also share with us, some of the new government initiatives that's in the pipeline that maybe will continue to leverage this digital identity?
Yes, let me just speak about two. One was Seniors Go Digital, and the other was Hawkers Go Digital. The idea behind Seniors Go Digital came about because we saw during the circuit breaker that many of the seniors who were not digitally savvy felt isolated, especially those living alone. And they had very little means of being able to reach out to others, except maybe by telephone. They couldn't get to see their loved ones or their families. Whereas if it was something just as simple as being able to use the WhatsApp video function or FaceTime, it would have made a huge difference. We also saw that in the case of those who had mental health issues, again, if you couldn't meet the person face to face, at least being able to see that person on screen would have made a difference. So that really brought home to us the fact that if you don't bring the seniors on board, they will be digitally excluded. And some of them would have had to depend on families or friends going to market for them, because there was one stage when we said, seniors, please stay at home.
Yes.
Whereas if they were able to order online, that would also make things so much more convenient for them. So we therefore launched this program, and we realized that it was more than just having a device available for them. They have to know how to use the device. But if you can do those two successfully, then they can stay connected, and they can do things like, check health status. And very importantly, getting medicines, because you can then let the doctor or the clinic know you need the medicine, and then the medicine can be delivered to you. All of these benefits would have come with digital inclusion, which in turn would have depended to some extent on a digital identity. So that was the driving thinking behind Seniors Go Digital. Hawkers Go Digital was a separate thing. It was more of a business consideration because, well, the businesses that actually survived and thrived during the circuit breaker were supermarkets, grocery stores, and food outlets that had online delivery. And we really did not want to see our hawkers, many of whom, not all are literate or they are older, they come from an era where they worked from the age of 15, 16, they're not digitally savvy. And we really did not want to see them lose out. I remember going to my hawker center at Tiong Bahru and looking around, and it was so sad to see all the tables and seats taped up and many of the stalls closed. There were some that were open. And the ones that were open, though, were also the ones who took orders online. There were some others who had regular customers, so it was fine. But if we don't want them to be left behind, then it's very important that they must be able to take online orders. And a prerequisite of that is you must be able to have the e-payment solution.
Yes.
So, so we just don't want anyone to be left behind.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. We look forward to those initiatives. Now, I'm going to take a different tack here. There is a question from the audience. And the question is, do you think women are well represented in Singapore's identity sector? And why is that so? And do you think more can be done to attract more women to the identity or technology sectors? So maybe Helen, you would like to take a go at this first?
Yeah, I think in the Singapore context, the women, I don't believe, is very well represented in the technological space. And that's probably because women in the past has always looked to other sectors, other education courses as probably more women sort of courses that are more suited for women. Engineering is definitely not one of those that women tend to think this is suitable for us. But as we progress, women are now coming into the STEM space. I mean, more and more women are looking into more technology space, more the engineering space, because they feel that whatever the men can do, they can do so too. So I think in years to come, maybe in a couple of years to come, there will be more represented, and more so on the leadership role. I think right now there are quite a few that are in the technology space, in the technology companies. You can see, there are many that have risen to, to senior management positions. So I will be more well represented in a couple of years to come.
You not just about Singapore, but I think it helps technology space, not just in Singapore. I feel there is a paucity of women in senior leadership roles, and that's generally true at a corporate sector across functions. But there is an overrepresentation in support functions like finance and HR and marketing. But definitely in the business and the technology domains, there is a paucity. And I believe one of the reasons is absolutely what Helen said. Girls entering the STEM careers and then staying with STEM careers is a bit of a problem that needs to be attended, and they need to be encouraged to probably do that. Even where you have STEM oriented women and they come into corporate life, at the middle career level, there is a huge precipitous drop off. And I think that is a big issue, because while they have probably built 10 or 12 years of experience and suddenly they kind of drop off the job front, that I think causes a vacuum for leadership role hires. So it is a problem not just in identity space. I think it's a more widespread issue to be attended to. And I think it's front and center of most progressive organizations now. So hopefully over the next 3 to 4 years, we'll see the difference.
Minister, what do you think we could do more to encourage women into this area?
I think we should start early, because when you start early and there's some who like science, math, and so on, that should be encouraged. Then there's some who don't, and those you have to encourage them and get over that hump or that fear. Very often it's the fear, because if you don't know how to do it, then it's like, okay, I don't know how to do this. It's difficult. I don't want to be embarrassed. I'll just stay away from it. I'll do something else that I feel more comfortable with. So I think active intervention at an early age is important. But I also think that at the other end of the scale, you have to keep doing this throughout life. When they make their choices at secondary school level as to what subject combination to take, when they're doing career choices later on. So things like what you are doing, Women in Identity, having people, organizations or people come up, encouraging girls to code, to have digitalized solutions is very important. I was on another conference the other day. There was a woman entrepreneur, and I really liked the name of her project. It was called the Lavender Spaceship Project. And it was really to get girls into physics and STEM, but the idea of spaceship because of science, but lavender because, yeah, that's kind of a nicer, softer, more girl color, right? Or one that would be more attractive to
I love
girls.
the name.
I thought it was a great name,
Yeah.
but it really encapsulated what she was trying to do, which was to make a hard science subject attractive to girls, and stepping into that space and actively intervening.
Thank you. We have a question here from the audience. They find that the talk was very insightful, so thank you to the speakers earlier. The question is about digital technologies adoption. What do you think slows it down most? Is it mostly due to lack of awareness or just general reluctance? What sort of concerns do you typically face from the end users, and how do you address them? Maybe Rama, you'd like to take the first shot at this?
Sure. So for digital identity adoption or digital adoption, I think at the most basic level, mobile connectivity, broadband, infrastructure creation, and smartphone penetration are perhaps the foundational steps. The second part of it really is driving comfort with slow starts, doing small things digitally. For all kinds of population, the senior citizens, the young ones will obviously do it, but to try and carry everybody with it, right? I think beyond that, everyone needs to have a trusted credential. If you want to be able to operate digitally, it needs to be easy. The friction needs to go away. One of the challenges is really this whole plethora of how do I operate this domain? What is the protocol of password on this one? Oh my God, I've forgotten. How do I do this? So you try a couple of times and then there is drop off. So you need to create trusted credentials that can seamlessly travel across domains. And therefore, like I say, establishing the digital first mile is so critical. We all talk about last miles, but I think where this all falls off is actually establishing the digital first mile, which is have an identity, make it digital, make it secure, make sure that all of the use cases that are created are integrating with this core identity. Drive consumer education, create the right kind of government policies for governance, because an ecosystem cannot develop and flourish unless there is a proper governance framework. And therefore, that is such a critical step. The other part, which I think we talk less about, is to address this concern. And you asked, the big brother concern. One of the reasons why there is concern is when there is concentration of data in any one entity. That could be the government, that could be another private entity. But when there is concentration of data, it attracts bad people, right? And very smart bad people, and therefore there is risk. So central databases is a huge subject to be addressed. The more authoritative databases with distinct data elements, the more distributed they are, the higher will be the comfort. The other thing is, from a user perspective, I should always feel that I have control over my data. I decide who to share it with. There is a system of securing consent from a user, right? As a corporate entity, as an individual, whatever, right? And then I think creating that fidelity and that trust in the entire ecosystem. Because if you really want digital adoption to happen, then the individual, the consumer, the SME with the small shop that Minister talked about, the corporate with the big entity transactions, and the government should all make it easy for everyone in the ecosystem to do business with each other, which basically means a singular, interoperable way of doing business is what we all need to strive for.
Yeah, thank you. But before I hand the question over to Helen, that I would like to add on one more question. And this is from the audience actually. Given the based on what Rama just mentioned just now, right? Think about it from the unique and singular nature of biometric information. Biometric leaks may be irreversible. How can we mitigate this risk?
Okay, so I think your first question was on, how to encourage digital identity,
Yes.
consumers to get on to digital identity. And I know, there are different aspects to it. Some people, it's just due to fear factor. There's certain population that even though they can access the computers, they're just fearful. And that's why the Senior Go Digital, it was useful to have a more inclusion in bringing the seniors on board. That there is also people who are economically not able to access broadband and could have accessibility on digital devices. How do we then bring them on board? I guess that's the other question that Singapore government has done much during COVID-19 with the sharing of computers to people needing classes, and I think there has to be classes available that makes it easy for people to understand that digital is not so scary. It's easy to get on, and once you've got on that first hurdle, it's then easy for people to understand that a web page is a web page. You can get on anyway. I know, my father is 92, and to get him to the first step, he was afraid to break that handphone using WhatsApp. I mean, that's their mentality. If I do something wrongly, will I break my handphone? And I can't call my children anymore. We had to get him off that first step. You don't break anything. You just can't get on. That's it. You don't break anything. And with online banking, I know a lot of people had that fear of first step. If I do something wrongly, will I just lose all my money in 1 second? I mean, this sort of phobia can be overcome with education. With training, education, we can bring all on board. Your second question was on biometrics. What if it gets compromised, and what if there's a leakage? The issue here is that we do not just singly use biometrics as a single factor. It should never be that. The other component that we talked about was having multiple different multimodal. And the last thing I'd like to emphasize is biometrics is not your face. It's actually using unique feature points. So you actually can generate a different template. If that ever get compromised, you have to generate a different template. So those are, there are solutions that can address the fear factor.
I was on mute. So thank you. We have a few minutes left, and I would like to maybe post this last question to our panelists so that we can have your closing comments on this topic. In 3 years' time, what, in your personal opinion, will be the state of digital identity in Singapore or anywhere in the world? Maybe Rama, you'd like to start?
Sure. When you predict Singapore, it's very hard, right? Because we're already running ahead of everyone else. And then I'm really sticking my neck out and saying things that I have no business saying. But one clear prediction, wherever we are, we'll probably be way ahead of where we are, in 3 years' time, right? But beyond that, I think for Singapore specifically, Singapore has always operated as a great cross-border hub in a region, right? It's been one of our strongest features as a country. And as the world goes digital, translation of that strength into the digital world is probably the next big leap that I am so confident Singapore will take. How does that apply to the subject that we are all talking about today? It is that leap of taking a government ID that we all have and making it probably operatable in a cross-border context. For example, somebody who is a Singaporean who is now living in Australia should be able to use the SingPass ID and do transactions online, even if the merchant is not in Singapore. That's one application. Similarly, somebody who's traveling into Singapore, for example, from Australia, should probably be able to use that ID and conduct transactions here. A non-Singaporean should be able to also operate in the same manner. So there is a bit of a roadmap here that I think should play out. The other thing that I think is this collaborative ecosystem that I talk about, because strategic interoperability across different dimensions of an economy so you attend to the consumer part, but it's also very important to attend to the SME and the corporate flows, because until you can wire up that entire ecosystem and make it collaborative, there will always be non-contiguous blocks that kind of bring the whole dividend down. So I think from a Singapore perspective, this is really what I would say. Application use cases, right? So as many as can be generated, and the comfort of the whole nation should go up. So not just for Singapore, I do believe that the creation of an interoperable framework with a lot of government governance behind it, defined by the regulators and the government itself, is very important. And creating a parallel commercial applications of it is very important, and bringing that together and demonstrating trust in the ecosystem.
Yeah, so I think in the Singapore context, Singapore government is actually driving a lot of these things. COVID-19 actually shows where all the areas that are lacking, and Singapore government is trying to fill the gap. And so I think in time to come, it will be an all-inclusive where everybody can be on this digital platform and the ecosystem can be formed. And with this NDI in place, it's actually making easier for all businesses and consumers to get onto the platform. With government driving it, it makes it easier and less costly for everybody to have a digital digital identity management system. So that sort of linked the whole formula together with government being the driving force. So I believe that Singapore will emerge as the leader of all these Asian countries as the digital identities in the digital identity space.
Minister, we heard a lot about Singapore leading this. Would you like to share with us your comments?
Yeah, yes, maybe if I can wrap up by saying that I think that there are three areas. First, nationally, because in 3 years, talking about 3 years' time, right? And we've already seen how in the space of just 2 to 3 months, so much has changed. So 3 years is a really long time. And all the things which Rama and Helen said are valid. So I would say that, number one, nationally, I would hope that within 3 years, we would have grown the ecosystem, made it stronger, more robust, and managed to onboard pretty much everybody, both individuals as well as businesses. That's number one. Number two, on the business and economic side, for Singapore to basically tap into the regional digital economy and global economy so that our businesses will be able to do business digitally, be able to sell overseas, which now sort of is something that's more of an aspiration than actually doing that in practice. But COVID-19 has shown that this is the way that they have to go. So adoption of solutions should become a matter of course. Doing businesses using digital platforms should become a matter of course. And basically plugging into the global digital economy. Then the third aspect is from outside, being able to connect with Singapore and transact digitally. I think that's crucial as well. I mean, if Singapore is to be a hub, we should also be a digital hub where you can do many of the connections here and transact and do a lot of things. I'll just give one very simple example. And here I must do a plug for Singapore Customs because they come under Ministry of Finance. Customs has a customs app. So if you are overseas, you can do your GST declarations even when you're overseas. As you make your purchases, key them into the app, tabulate them all. And before you step into Singapore, you've paid your GST for, wherever you exceed the GST limit. That's a very simple example. It's the one existing today, but in 3 years' time, I would imagine there'll be a lot more of that, and you can basically do your Singapore transactions wherever you are all around the world.
Wow. Okay, we look forward to that. Certainly look forward to that. Thank
Work in
you,
progress.
everyone. Thank you. Special thank you to the panel for a very open and insightful discussion. I hope our audience can all join me to thank our very distinguished panel of speakers for a great discussion today on digital identity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister and Rama and Yim Cheng for the insightful panel discussion and interesting panel discussion. Now, can we have everybody face your camera and smile? We're going to take a photo shot of all of us. Next slide.
You done?
Jocelyn, can you share your next? Okay, in closing, we want to thank the panel discussion that is so in line with what Women in Identity is trying to do. And it's to be an all-inclusive with its diversity, as well as with bringing women more in the forefront of things for STEM. And we also like to thank NEC for the technical and marketing support for this webinar. And if you like to contact us, you can see the Women and Identity information on the screen right now. We also like for you to join us. So if you find all this interesting, please do join us and under the Women and Identity website. And you can follow us with all these tags on the screen. And lastly, I'd like to thank all our sponsors for helping women in identity progress in all our programs, in helping us advance in our ethos, in our principles. We thank all of them for continually supporting us. And a big thank you to all of you. And with this, I end the program for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.